By sheer coincidence, we're having this conversation exactly on the 10th anniversary of one of the most horrible crimes in the Norwegian history. Actually, the deadliest act of violence in Norway since the Second World War. The 2011 attacks in which Anders Breivik murdered almost 80 people, mostly teenagers. He tried to justify this crime with a manifesto, which was mainly influenced by the anti-Islamic ideology of the far-right movements. I saw some news recently that there were some disputes in Norway about how to respectfully approach this anniversary. How does Norwegian society reflect on this national tragedy 10 years after? And did this tragedy have any visible influence on the attitudes toward Islam and also the critics, of course, of Islam in the recent decade?
Yes, and my impression is that they got louder and became more prominent in the debate than they had so far, which is a paradox. You would expect when a far-right Islamophobe kills scores of children, you would expect a society to sort of, go into a war on terror against that kind of ideology. But this was not what happened. On the very evening of that tragic event, the Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg, who is now the Secretary General of NATO, but he was then Prime Minister, and the leader of the party, whose youth organization was the target of the killings on Utøya, in the midst of this personal tragedy also for him, he said that we are not going to let the terrorists win. We are going to meet this with more openness, more democracy, but not with naivete. So that was the chord that was struck from the beginning, which was, a great response. But it was a strange debate that followed. And I think that actually in the past week, I've seen a lot of signs that this debate is now turning around. Because the survivors from the Social Democratic Youth Organization have often been criticized and shouted down in public debate when they referred to their experience to warn against the spread of far-right hatred and Islamophobia. They have been criticized for playing the massacre card, they have been accused of trying to silence their political opponents with this. Whereas the people who were going on about Islam posing a danger to European civilization and to Norway and so on before the event went on doing so afterward. The blogger who the terrorist quoted most frequently in his manifesto, a Norwegian blogger, got a grant to write a book.
A national grant?
From a foundation set up to support free expression. they support a lot of things, including this. We have a blog, another blog. It used to be a kind of advocacy group for women from the Muslim community, but it's turned into a very anti-immigrant, anti-Islam propaganda outlet. It gets state funding and so on. And but in this last week, I see a lot of people in the Norwegian public conversation revising their stances and saying that we have given too much of a platform to the ideologies that motivated the terrorists, and too little of a platform to the victims. But it's a strange and sort of paradoxical development, I think. Certainly in line with the principle of more democracy, more openness, we did not clamp down on far-right speech after this. But I think we also failed as a society to confront it, to speak against it. If the Islamophobes got a platform, then to answer them, to rebut them, well, I could go on, but. And a lot of people have also remarked, well, if you look back at the cartoon incident in 2006, this was, in the following years, a lot of young Muslim people who had grown up in Norway entered the public debate for the first time. Before that, there were very few people in the Norwegian public speaking from a Muslim viewpoint. There were spokesmen here and there, but since the early 2000s, we have had a new generation of young intellectuals who take part in the debate. But a lot of people have remarked on this the last week that they have that Muslims have not been as much part of the debate after the terrorist attack as one might have expected. Perhaps they are afraid. Perhaps they find it a difficult discussion to enter into, so that we have these problems of how do we balance all these things, the freedom of expression, and at the same time the need to have a national conversation where Muslim citizens feel at home, where the victims of the attacks feel that they can speak out, where we don't meet the haters with legal restrictions necessarily, but where we certainly meet them as a society, speaking back, calling them out. So I'm hopeful that perhaps we're seeing a shift there now.